Hi there, and welcome to the Fultondale First podcast. I'm your host, Pastor Mark, and I'm excited that you have joined us for today's episode. On today's episode, we're going to talk with our Reach Director, Tiffany Rouse, about how God is using our church to reach our community and the world, and how you can be a part of what God is doing right here.
Welcome to the Fultondale First podcast. Our mission at Fultondale First is to love God, love people, and make disciples. And this podcast is aimed to help you join that mission. Thanks for joining us for this episode.
So before we get to today's episode, I want to introduce you a little bit to the podcast and what it's going to be like and what you can expect. This is our very first episode today. And so we're going to have 2 seasons every year of this podcast. It's going to be a weekly podcast, a new episode every week, each season. And each season's going to run between 12 to 15 episodes. And the first season, it's going to be me sitting down with some guests. And so I'll sit down with some of our staff members, some of our leaders in our church, some of our church members, and ministry leaders outside of our church that we're partnered with and connected with. And we'll learn how God is using those partnerships and using these people and using our church to make a difference. And then the second season is really going to be me talking about our church and our values and our mission, our vision, things like that, explaining why we do what we do here at Fultondale First. So that's what this podcast is going to be all about. And really, our mission at our church is the same as the mission for this podcast. Our mission is to love God, to love people, and make disciples. And so every episode of this podcast is designed and aimed to help you do just that, to love God, to love people, and make disciples. And my hope and my prayer is that every single episode of this podcast, whether you're watching or listening, is going to help you know and follow Jesus the rest of your life. So with that introduction out of the way, let's get to the first episode. Well, welcome in to this episode of our podcast, Fultondale First podcast, our very first episode. And I'm excited because we have one of our own. We've got Tiffany Rouse, our Reach Director, joining us. And so really, as you'll see, this podcast is a conversation. So Tiffany and I are just going to talk, and we're going to let you in on that conversation a little bit. And hopefully you'll get to know Tiffany a little bit and really find out how God is working here at Fultondale First, and really how He wants to work even more. So you're the Reach Director. How long have you been in that role?
About a year and a half, maybe
Okay.
A touch less than that.
Wow. Yeah, time flies. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm going to ask you a little bit about what your role is. So people watching or listening will find out what does the Reach Director do, and tell us a little bit about you and your story, your family, how God got you here, those kind of things.
Okay, so I guess I'll just start explaining my role as Reach Director.
Sure.
So as a Reach Director, I head up 3 teams: missions, outreach, and first impressions. So each of those teams, I have team leaders, and then they have people under them as well. So I'm honestly still learning a lot about my role and trying to do things a little bit better. I feel like I spent the last year kind of getting a handle on where we even were as a church in those areas. So hopefully a lot more exciting things to come soon from all 3 of those teams. So how I got here is a little bit of a long and windy road. I was raised in church. I was raised in a Christian home. Thank God for that. I grew up in a small little country church out in Pinson, Alabama, that my parents still go to this day. I've never had a time period of not being a part of a local body. And then when I got married to my husband in 2012, we did what a lot of married couples do, where we kind of, he grew up in a different church, where he didn't really grow up in church, but he had been attending a different church than I had when we got married. But then when we joined our lives together, we decided that we as a couple, as a family unit, needed to find our own church. So we did, and we settled on a church that was based in an underserved area in the Birmingham area. And that was what we dedicated our lives to for the next 10 years. We basically looked at ourselves as almost as missionaries living in an underserved area, serving a community. We had various leadership roles in that church, and we did a lot of mission-based work out of that church. things I literally never thought I would be involved in, that you just accidentally kind of get pulled into. But we felt a lot of purpose doing the work that we did with that church. Unfortunately, in 2022, that church had to shut its doors. And so for the first time in 10 years, we found ourselves looking for a new church. And we visited a lot of churches in the Birmingham metro area. The church we had been attending was further from our home. We live in the Gardendale area. So since our kids were getting a little older, we did place some importance on finding a church that was a little bit closer to our physical house, our physical location. And Fultondale First Baptist just checked almost all the boxes. We felt like it has had and has a fantastic children's ministry. I'm sure that you'll have a guest on talking about that in the near future. Right. And that was very important to us. But also we just saw so much potential for this church to be just such a mission-minded church. Y'all were already doing it, and it's only going to get, better from here. And that was something that was really important to us, and we saw that here. That's
awesome. Well, I've told you this before, but I'm so excited and glad that you guys are here. And so she mentioned, she's been in this role a year and a half. They've been attending, I guess, for a couple of years, 2.5 years.
Yeah, 2.5 years.
And God has already used your whole family in amazing ways. And so I'm so thankful for y'all. Well, tell us a little bit about what God's doing here. How has God used our church? And how is he using our church, to reach into our community? What ways do we do that? And I would even say, maybe talk about what we're doing really well, what's effective, but also what are some ways we can grow in reaching out to our community?
So the mission work this church is doing started long before I got here. Right. So I don't want anyone to get the impression that I have started any of this stuff. Right. I'm just really wanting to build on that legacy, because let me tell you, every person that I've talked to in this community, whether it be in a school or just a community setting, has mentioned about what this church did during the tornadoes. And I wasn't attending here at that time, but I know that this church, this building, and these people, it was very essential to the recovery from the tornadoes here in Fultondale and in North Jefferson County. Another thing that I feel like has had a long history of success is the food bank ministry.
Absolutely.
I know that we are in partnership with a few other churches as well, but it is such a strong ministry to this community, and I actually really hope that we can grow that even further. It's consistent. I mean, it's everything you want in a ministry. It meets needs. It's consistent. It's well done. And I hope to, like I said, grow that even further. More recently, we've been able to get in the schools more. We've been able to be a part of Tarrant High School, Fultondale Elementary, Fultondale High School, and Snow Rogers Elementary. So those are schools that we have been in doing various things just in the last year. And so I hope to grow our presence in those schools, because I just feel like to reach a community, you do it through schools, because that's where the families are,
It's really cool, because we had a school reach out to us this week.
Yes.
Which hadn't happened before, because I think it's because we're becoming more present, in those schools.
Exactly.
Awesome.
Exactly. And, I just want to, not to toot our own horn, all glory to God, but just over this Christmas season, in partnership with Fultondale Elementary, we were able to meet the needs of about 30 families, actually a little over 30 families, to provide Christmas gifts for their children.
Amazing.
And that is through the generosity of the giving in this church, the people organizing it, the school willing to work with us. And so that particular project really exceeded my expectations. I had in my mind what I thought we could do, and we really exceeded that. And so that was really exciting. I hope to continue that and build off of that as well.
Absolutely.
So those are some things that I just feel like we've done really, really well. So what I would love to see in the future, I don't really think that a church, we should definitely have structured programs that we can plug people into. And I want to do that. But I also want our missions to be organic as well. Like, as needs arise, we meet them. My hope is that in this community, when a need comes up, whether it's somebody in the schools or just somebody in the community, the elected officials, when a need comes up, they're like, I know who can help, Fultondale First Baptist. And they know exactly who to call, and we are prepared, we are ready to meet those needs, whatever they may be. And so that is what I'm really hoping that we can do. And so that's kind of what we're building, that foundation of trust within the community, which was already there,
right?
But we're just like expounding on it.
That's awesome. And I think that's when, that's when impact can really happen in a bigger way. Obviously it's happened a long before I was here too. The impact this church has in this community has been around a really long time. I remember when they were interviewing me almost 7 years, I guess it was 7 years ago now, this month, when the interview started. They were talking to me about the impact of this church over the generations. And it hadn't been that way for a few years, and so they wanted to get it back that way. And what a potential I think that our church has in this community. And I think that's one thing that, when we ask our people, like we just did a survey not too long ago about care and community outreach and stuff. And the one thing that people, I think, get excited about, but also desire even more of an impact is community and, reaching out with the gospel, with meeting physical needs. We talked about that in a sermon not too long ago. You have to meet the physical need sometimes before you can meet the spiritual need, because people who are hangry don't listen very well, and so they need to be taken care of and then given what they really need in the gospel. So that's community outreach. We got a lot going on obviously there all year long, different events, different opportunities come up, but we also your role is also involved in missions, like you talked about. So tell me some things that you're excited about in terms of our plans for missions and what's coming up.
Well, I've mentioned a few of the local missions things that we've done and are doing, but one of the most exciting things coming up is our international mission trip to Chiquimula, Guatemala. That's happening in June. And I don't think that this particular church has been able to do an international mission trip in a while. Right. And so this is something new for everybody, and I'm really excited about the group that we're going. We're going to go meet some missionaries down there. I've actually met them in person because they were able to come into Birmingham over the holiday season. And my hope for that trip is, of course, we're serving a community. We're working alongside missionaries who are doing a lot of work down in this small city in Guatemala. A lot of very good work, but my hope is really just forming a partnership. My hope for international missions here at Fultondale First is not so much that we just, this year we go here, the next year we go to Europe, the next year we go to Africa. It's really to build relationships with a place and a people, and there be return trips year after year, so that everybody in our church would have at least the opportunity over the series of years to take a trip to the same place, to meet the same people, and that those people would know that they have, a community of brothers and sisters in Christ in Fultondale, Alabama. They may not be able to point us out on a map, but they know that we're here, that we're praying for them, that they're praying for us, and that we're able to meet their needs on a regular basis and not just a one-time, 1 week trip.
Yep. I think that's a big deal.
Yeah.
That partnership is so huge. And honestly, we've been looking for that for a long time. That's why we haven't taken an international trip since I've been here. We tried a couple times, but that partnership, we just couldn't find it. And so, man.
Well, and I feel like this particular partnership happened very organically. Yep. Like it just was someone I knew that I talked to them, and then they talked to the missionaries. And the missionaries that are in this place in Guatemala are people that they were serving in their local church. They were from Tennessee and took a short-term mission trip and felt the calling on their lives to be full-time missionaries, foreign missionaries, and sold everything they had and took their whole family there, even their young children. And that is such a testament to me of why these kind of trips are important.
That's right.
And of course, like our primary focus is serving the people we're going to serve, spreading the gospel. But you never know whose heart might be stirred going on a trip like this, whether it's to be a foreign missionary, support a foreign missionary, or anything like that.
That's right. I really do believe and hope and pray that God would use this trip, but future trips like it, whether they're international or domestic, to really capture somebody's heart and call them to missions. Every week when I pray that God would raise up from our church future missionaries, pastors, church leaders, and I think a trip like this really does go a long way in doing that. That's definitely my prayer. How many do we have on the team?
We have 10 people. 10 are going.
That is awesome.
Yes, and that was so. I did not know what to expect when we started this process of getting people signed up. But we have 10 people that have committed. We've been raising funds. We're still raising funds, and we will actually be able to stay in a house with the missionaries. So they have a house that the upstairs are all bunk rooms. So we'll be there with them and going out and doing their daily work. They do a variety of things. They work in an orphanage. They do door-to-door evangelism up in the mountain communities, which are mostly indigenous people. They have a church they serve out of, obviously, and they also serve in a dump community, which is just what it sounds. It's families that have makeshift houses like in a dump, and they do a church service there once a week.
That's awesome.
And I mean, when I met with them, they just lit up when they talked about that, and they were like, "This is the most joyous part of our week to to participate in those services."
Well, why don't we do this? Why don't we put maybe in the show notes or in the description on YouTube some ways they can pray. People watching and listening can pray for this team, because that's a big deal. That's
yes,
huge.
yes,
We'll
and I'll link down. And I can send you the link to the missionaries page that they highlight what they're doing.
Oh, that'd be awesome.
And so I'm sure that they'll highlight what we're doing when we're down there as well.
Yeah, we'll include that too. That's fantastic. So a couple things before we finish, I want to ask. So I think the first thing I want to ask is, what do you believe God wants to do as a church? What do you believe He wants us to do as a church to reach our community, to reach the nations with the gospel? What do you think God is, maybe not immediate, but how does God want to use us to do that?
So I think the Bible makes it pretty clear that God's people are all missionaries.
That's right.
We use the term missionary a lot to talk about someone who leaves their home and goes to a foreign country. And that is also a missionary. Sure. It's a very important role. But all of us are missionaries, and we are all expected to go therefore and make disciples,
right.
And that could be in our homes, that like our literal homes, that could be in our community, that could be at a state level, national level, international level. But all of us are called to do something. And I think that our churches are meant, even from like a historical perspective, when you look at the early church, they were doing the things that really no one else wanted to deal with. They were dealing with the least of these. They were dealing with like the problems that everybody else were turning away from. And I think that's what we are called to do as Christians, and therefore as a church, when it comes to missions. Like, we need to be looking for these opportunities, all of us, not from like a staff level. Like, I don't want to be the one, saying, oh, this is what we should do, or this is the project we should start. I want people to come to me and say, hey, I realize that, there's a lot of kids in the school that don't have school supplies. And then I'm happy to facilitate that project, and let's serve, and I can head that up. But it should be grassroots.
That's right.
The people of the church should be in their own communities saying, I saw this need, and then the church body can organize and meet the need. Yeah. And in this church, we actually have so many people in different communities within North Jefferson County. And there's such great churches in North Jefferson County. So there's a lot of people serving in different communities. I think our first calling is here in Fultondale, since that's where we geographically are. But I need people telling me what the needs are in their own communities. And then I'm happy to figure out a way for us to meet those needs. But I don't think it should be top down telling our church members like what we need to do. They need to tell me what needs to be done, and then I just organize it.
That's a great perspective. And that's true. I mean, God has called us to be missionaries every single day, wherever we are, right? So, I mean, I think this trip to Guatemala is going to be fantastic, but it would be a shame if our church, sent a team to Guatemala, but we're not even missionaries where we are,
exactly.
right? Which is very common. We're good at going out somewhere, but we're not so good here sometimes. But I think that's right. You mentioned it. We have people in our church from Fultondale, from Birmingham, Pinson, Gardendale, Morris, Kimberly, Warrior, Hayden, Vestavia, Hoover. I mean, Hueytown. We got people all over Birmingham, and God has called each of those people and families to be missionaries right there. The gospel outpost that God has given them in their home. And you're right. All of us should. And it's harder, it's easier said than done. It's sometimes hard to live your life with eyes open because sometimes we see those needs and we kind of ignore them because it's hard sometimes to meet them. We have to get out of our comfort zone, but that's fantastic. So let me finish this up by asking this question. For those listening, for those watching who are part of our church, what are some ways that they can get involved? What are some things that they can do, steps that they can take to be involved in what God is doing?
Well, as far as just like the formal things that we're doing here at Fultondale, I am in the process of trying to create just a contact list so that when a need arises, I can immediately send it out and say, hey, we're going, literally this next weekend, we're going to go feed the Tarrant High School basketball team. Please, if you can, come. And so just getting on that list, which you can do that by, speaking to me or any one of our other team leaders, that just gets you the information of like what is happening. Beyond that, if you see something in your community, if you see a need, or if God has laid something on your heart, because I truly feel like God calls us all to different things.
That's right.
Like we're all going to be passionate about some different area, not just physical area, but just something, whether it's foster care or education or whatever it may be. So if there is something God has laid on your heart, come and see me and let's think of a way of how we can get involved in that. And honestly, another thing that I want to mention, back to your question about what God's plan for the church is, I would love to see us partnering more with other churches. Like this is not about Fultondale First Baptist. Right. It is about Jesus,
it's about the kingdom. Yeah.
Exactly. And I would love if somebody sees something another church is doing and thinks, maybe we can help that church. Let's do it.
Yep.
Like I love partnering with other churches. There should not be competition or ego involved in missions. That's right. ever. And sometimes it does happen that way. But even if somebody in our church sees something another church is doing, we're not going to just do it our own way. We're going to go work with that other church. Right. That's what we should be doing.
That's right. I mean, that's kind of our philosophy anyway. Like if we see something even the city's doing,
exactly,
and we can support it, we're just going to do what they're doing and help
There's
them.
no need to reinvent the wheel.
That's right.
Like we want to come alongside and not try to just duplicate the effort.
That's awesome. So Tiffany, thank you for hanging out and for sharing some of this. We're going to put Tiffany's contact information in the show notes and description as well, so you can get in touch with her. And my hope and prayer in this first episode is that God has used this conversation to begin the gears turning for somebody that needs to be involved, that wants to make an impact but doesn't know how. And so you've definitely given us some ways to do that. And our whole goal, our mission at our church is to love God, love people, and make disciples. And that's really what Reach is all about. And so my prayer is that this episode has helped you further in doing that and to help you know and follow Jesus the way He's called you to follow Him. So thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for joining us for this episode. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss a single episode. Help us spread the word about the podcast by sharing on socials too. Thanks again, and we'll see you next episode.